Welcome to the Reading Recovery Works Best, What the Numbers Have to Say video from the International Data Evaluation Center at The Ohio State University. This video is a companion to the downloadable document that's called Reading Recovery Works Best When, and in this video we'll talk about the numbers behind the information presented in that document. So who's talking data to you? Well, you have me, Jeff Breimer-Bashore, Director of IT and Operations and Principal Investigator here at the International Data Evaluation Center. So as I talk about data in the video, I want to relate it back to some real-world examples so the data actually has some meaning for you. So when we have some results and we talk about the results, we're going to use the example of one reading recovery teacher working in a single school. So usually a reading recovery teacher will work with 8 students in reading recovery's one-to-one scenarios. So typically that's 4 students in the fall and 4 students in the spring. So we're going to start off by talking about protecting reading recovery lesson time. So we want to emphasize here that it's important to give reading recovery teachers every opportunity, to work with their children. Be flexible with their lesson time. Try to ensure that children get their daily lessons. If you have special events happening during the day, schedule around those special events. Also, you want to avoid using reading recovery teachers as your permanent go-to substitute teachers every time someone is sick or ill on staff. And also you want to avoid trying to use reading recovery teachers as test proctors for your mandated state testing or your internal school testing. But if these things are unavoidable, try to be flexible with that time. If you have students that are being served getting their lessons in the morning and they miss their lessons because a staff member was out and you did have to use a reading recovery teacher as a substitute, be flexible and allow that student to get their lessons in the afternoon instead. So here is what the data have to say about lesson time. Now, this chart below is showing the percentage of students catching up to their peers compared to the number of lessons that were missed because the teacher was unavailable. So remember, in reading recovery teachers work with the hardest to teach students, those students who are struggling most with reading, the lowest 20%. And we are trying to get those students up to average levels of literacy. We are trying to catch them up to their peers. At the bottom of the chart is the number of lessons missed because the teacher was unavailable. Those types of lessons missed that could be avoided, if school administrators are flexible with reading recovery lessons time. And then we're comparing it to the percentage of children that catch up to their peers. So we are going to use the simple example. Remember, our reading recovery teachers work with 8 children throughout the school year. So if we start on the left-hand side here, and in the absolute best scenario where teachers are missing 0 lessons, they are getting 6 out of 8 of their students to catch up to their peers. Now, as we move from left to right across the chart, you see that the bars go down. So when a teacher starts missing 8 lessons with all of her students, she's now only able to get 5 out of 8 of her students to catch up to their peers. And then we go all the way to the right, sort of the extreme here, with teachers missing 16 or more lessons because they're not able to make the lessons. They're only able to get 4 out of 8 of their students to catch up to their peers. So you can see it's important that we are flexible and that we give every chance for students to get their reading recovery lessons. So now we're going to focus on principal and classroom support for reading recovery. Now, reading recovery works in any school scenario. Reading recovery works even in scenarios where reading recovery is operating as its own little island and other teachers in the school may not know exactly what reading recovery is. They just know it's there and it works with kids. But reading recovery works best when it has principal and classroom support. And what we mean by this principal and classroom support, staff and principals are engaged and supportive and knowledgeable about what reading recovery is. That there's some school-wide problem solving going on to ensure program fidelity. So if something is affecting the program, that the school is reactive and will help ensure that that they are doing reading recovery like they are supposed to. And as we said before, protecting that lesson time, that the principals and classroom teachers are supportive and are protecting that reading recovery lesson time. That there's frequent communication between reading recovery teachers and classroom teachers. And that the reading recovery teacher is actually viewed as a school leader or a resource for other teachers to work with. And then finally, that classroom instruction is supportive of reading recovery. So we're going to talk about some data again. We're going to compare some results, and we're going to compare results where we have schools that do have this principal and classroom support, and we're going to compare it to schools that don't have this principal and classroom support. So schools that have, are fully supporting reading recovery, and then schools that aren't providing much support or no support for reading recovery. So let's take a look at what the data have to say. Now, we don't collect this type of data every year about the support within reading recovery schools. So in the 2016-17 school year, we did a sample of our schools, and we asked teacher readers to rate their schools based on those characteristics that we talked about. And in this sample, we collected data on 137 schools, and it included 1,513 students. Of those 137 schools, you can see in the table down here, about 53 of those schools fell into the full support category, and then 8 of those schools fell into the no support category. And the schools that aren't a part of this fell in somewhere in between. They had some sort of support within their school structure, but we are focusing on schools that either had the full support or no support. And in this analyses for the full support, we analyzed data on 601 students, and for the no support schools, it was 81 students. So if we look at the next column, catching up to peers, in our schools where they had full support, 74% of the kids were catching up to their peers. So if we go back to our example for one teacher serving 8 kids, this is about 6 out of 8 students catching up to their peers. And this is compared to schools where there is no support for reading recovery. Only about 5 out of 8 students were catching up to their peers per teachers in that school. If we go to the next column, growth on literacy measures. So in reading recovery, we measured children's literacy growth using the observation survey for early literacy achievement. And if you compare the growth of reading recovery students to what the average first grader makes, in the schools getting full support, they were making, 2 months additional growth as compared to the students in schools where they were getting no support. So in the schools where they were reading recovery is not getting any support, they're making about 1 year and 2 months of growth. Now that's still good, 1 year, 2 months of growth. Remember how I said that reading recovery still works no matter what the support infrastructure? It just works best when principals and classroom teachers are supporting reading recovery. And then finally, the last piece of data we're going to look at are unfinished interventions in the spring. So sometimes when kids enter reading recovery, their interventions have to stop because the end of the school year has come upon them and they haven't reached average levels of literacy and they haven't caught up to their peers. So in schools where reading recovery is receiving this full support, about 1 out of 8 students per teacher every year has an unfinished intervention. In schools where reading recovery is not getting support from principals in the classroom, that number jumps up by 1. About 2 out of 8 students is having an unfinished intervention in the spring. Now, I've kind of, on the previous slides, presented data in sort of a piecemeal way, and each individual piece of data may not seem like a compelling reason why you would want to try to optimize your reading recovery program. But I think what I'm trying to make the point is that it's not so much the individual pieces of information I shared today, it's them together that make the biggest impact. So I'll say it like this, that support from principals and staff are critical. And with this as a support, it will help your reading recovery teachers foster 2 months of additional literacy growth from your reading recovery student, which will allow one additional child to catch up to their peers and will reduce unfinished interventions in the spring by one student. So what does this kind of support look like? How do you start fostering this kind of support in your school? You can do simple things. Principals can be invited to observe reading recovery training and ongoing professional development. Classroom teachers and principals can be invited to be a part of the student selection meetings in schools, helping select which students for reading recovery. And then principals can encourage classroom and reading recovery teachers to have regular meetings to consult about student progress. And then finally, one other easy thing you can do is reading recovery teachers can simply invite classroom teachers and principals to observe reading recovery lessons. Okay, we're going to move on to the last section of our video here. And this section is addressing serving children with urgency. And in reading recovery, we want to give children as much time as they need, but we want to return children to the classroom when they start meeting grade level expectations. And so what we are trying to specifically address here is the situation where in the fall, sometimes teachers, even though a child is ready to return to the classroom, may feel like they want to hold on to children for a little bit longer so they can give them a little bit more support. And in general, we do believe in reading recovery that students who start reading recovery in the fall are entitled to 20 weeks of support. But if a student shows that they have an independent literacy system before 20 weeks, it is okay to end that intervention and move on to the next eligible student. So let's look at what the data have to say about this. So here we have another bar chart. And the bar chart is showing the number of students catching up to peers in the spring. So this chart is focusing on the 4 children served in the springtime. So the number of students catching up to peers in the spring per teacher versus the length of their fall interventions. So down along the bottom of here, we're looking at 3 different scenarios. Scenarios where we have teachers holding most or all of their, or working with most or all of their students for 18 weeks or less in the fall. Teachers who are working with their students for 19 weeks, most or all of their students for 19 weeks in the fall. And then teachers who are working with their fall students for 20 or more weeks in the fall. All right. And then over here it just shows the number of students that have complete interventions. So you can see that teachers who in general work with their fall students for 18 weeks or less have 3 out of their 4 students in the spring catch up to their peers, making that accelerated growth and catching up to their peers. But as we move to the right and holding for students longer and longer in the fall, you can see that these teachers are having 1 less student, only 2 of their fall or their spring students catch up to their peers in the spring. And these data come from the 2014 to 2017-18 school year and included just over 55,000 students. So let me just sum it up again here. So we've said this earlier, give children as much time as they need, but return children to the classroom when they meet grade level expectations. Students who start reading recovery in fall are entitled to 20 weeks of support if they need it. But if a student shows that they have an independent literacy system before 20 weeks, it is okay to end the student's intervention and move on to the next eligible child. And then what the data are telling us here is that teachers who serve children for 18 weeks or less in the fall are able to successfully complete an additional intervention for a child in the spring as compared to those who where teachers are holding them for 19 or 20 weeks in reading recovery. All right, we're going to finish up this video here with a little data wrap up. Now, we've been spending a lot of time talking about where reading recovery works best, and I just want to make it clear again that reading recovery works in all school scenarios. It works in scenarios where reading recovery is receiving that full support. It's working when reading recovery is receiving some school support, and it's working when reading recovery is actually getting little or no support from principals or school members. It just works best, and you get the most from what you're investing in when you have that principal and school full support behind reading recovery. Throughout this video, we showed some data about how some little changes can do this and here and can help one more student catch up to their peers. And each individual change may seem small, but these little changes adds up to larger improvements. Some of the improvements that you're going to see if you go through this exercise are going to be hard to quantify, to put into numeric values. They may show themselves in the way that, school staff start interacting with each other and supporting each other, and a change in school culture. So be aware of that as well. If you have any questions about this video, you can send your questions to helpdesk@idecweb.us, and you can even get more information about the International Data Evaluation Center at our website at www.idecweb.us. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for watching this video on Reading Recovery Works Best. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel right there. You can subscribe to even learn more about reading recovery data. Thank you.